She was just a barefoot girl left behind at a desert train station. No name, no future, just a broken doll and a pair of boots too big to wear. He was a silent rancher with nothing left to lose. What happened next, no one in town could have predicted. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about what happens when two forgotten souls dare to choose each other. Stay with us because by the end you might just believe in hope again. The desert didn't whisper that morning. It howled. It roared through the bones of Monument Valley Station like it was trying to shake something loose from the past. The wind came down off the rocks, angry and alive, sending dust into the sky, until it looked like even the sun was ashamed to shine through. There were no birds, no voices, just the groan of the old water tower and the creak of wooden boards under a girl who'd already learned what silence could mean. Clara Wynn sat alone on the bench, barefoot, bruised and bone-tired, her knees pulled tight beneath a dress that used to fit better. She looked too small for the space she occupied, and yet somehow the emptiness bowed around her like it knew she wasn't going anywhere. A pair of oversized women's boots laced together at the neck bounced against her shoulder, tied there like a memory someone else might have forgotten. She wasn't crying. That part was done back in the train washroom, huddled beside a cooling hand that had once tucked her in, and now wouldn't move again. Her mother had slipped away somewhere between Gallup and this godforsaken station, and the conductor hadn't known what to do. So he said, "Just wait here, sweetie, someone will come." Then he boarded the train again and never looked back. But no one came. An hour passed, then another. The heat wrapped around her a dry, breathless thing. A tumbleweed blew across the platform like it was late for something. The girl didn't flinch. She sat still, like stillness could make her invisible, like quiet might keep her safe. The shadows changed. The sun clawed its way higher in the sky, then began to slide. A local cart passed by its driver, pretending not to see her. Townsfolk came and went, eyes skimming over her, as if acknowledging her would cost them something precious. One man offered a cough. Another spat in the dirt. No one asked her name. No one asked why a girl was sitting in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a ragged doll and a pair of boots too big for her. The wooden doll in her pocket was missing one arm, and both eyes its paint flaked off in patches. She turned it over and over like a charm, a way to hold back the wild grief rattling her chest. That doll had been her mama's once. Now it was all she had left that smelled like warmth and remembered bedtime songs. She held it tight enough to leave marks on her palm. A stray dog wandered close, gave a single sniff and trotted on. Dust gathered in the creases of her elbows and the folds of her too-thin dress. The wind didn't stop. It pulled at her tangled hair, slipped beneath her skin, and whispered things no child should ever have to understand. Her toes were blistered, her lips chapped, but she sat still like a rootless thing trying to convince the land to keep her. The sound of hooves didn't startle her. Not much could anymore. But the man who came riding into the station didn't look like the kind who belonged anywhere particular. Jonas Calder was made of edges and quiet. His coat was sun-faded, his hat pulled low. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to be surprised. He swung down from his horse a tired chestnut with a white streak over its eye, tied the reins with care, not urgency, lifted a crate of nails from the saddle like it was part of some routine he didn't question anymore. Only when he turned toward the bench did he see her. She didn't blink. Neither did he. The moment between them stretched long and taut like something about to snap, but it didn't. Jonas reached into his coat, pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, held it out wordless. After a long beat, he said, "Turkey." She took it with both hands. Her fingers didn't shake. Her eyes didn't move from his. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently, as if it might vanish if she rushed. He turned back toward his wagon, said nothing more, didn't ask questions, didn't expect answers. Clara took a bite, then another, swallowed. Her voice when it came was quiet but firm. "Can I come with you, just for today?" He stopped mid-step. The wind rattled the eaves above. Dust swept low across the wooden planks like forgotten prayers. Jonas looked up at the sky like it owed him an answer. He nodded. She didn't wait. She stood, slung the boots behind her back, tucked her doll into the crook of her arm, and walked to the wagon. Climbed up without help. Settled beside the crate of nails like she belonged there. He didn't offer a hand up. He didn't ask her name. He climbed into the driver's seat, clicked his tongue for the horse. They moved forward away from the station, the wind at their backs, the sun sliding down behind the cliffs. The rails gleamed behind them like a path to somewhere she'd never return. She didn't look back. And for the first time since the train pulled away, Clara breathed without holding something inside. The desert watched them go. The wind softened. The station was empty again. The road to Jonas Calder's ranch wasn't really a road at all. It was more of a scar in the land worn down by weather and memory, more suggestion than direction. The wagon creaked and rocked across the uneven ground, the wheels grinding softly through the red dirt and gravel. Clara sat beside Jonas, not holding anything, not saying a word, but she looked. She looked at everything like she was afraid it might vanish if she blinked. They passed rock spires shaped by centuries of wind and gullies dry as an old man's humor. The land was bare, quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of place that listened, the kind of place that remembered. When the house came into view, it didn't rise proud from the earth. It nestled into it. A squat cabin worn silver by sun and years, with a sagging porch and a tin roof that rattled even in mild wind. There was a chicken coop behind it, a barn missing a door, and a crooked fence barely keeping itself together. To anyone else, it might have looked like ruin. But to Clara, it looked like someone had tried. He helped her down from the wagon without a word. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect it. Inside, the house was cool and smelled faintly of pine smoke and old paper. One chair sat by the hearth, its cushion threadbare. A small table, 2 chairs, one buried under a stack of old books. Shelves lined with worn spines and yellowed pages. There were no pictures on the walls, just shadows and silence. Jonas poured her a tin cup of water, set it down. She looked at it a long while before picking it up with both hands, as if it were something sacred. He gestured to the empty chair. She sat without speaking. That night he laid a quilt on the couch. It was clean, but worn, folded neat. "You can take the bed upstairs," he said gruffly. She shook her head. "I'll stay with the dog." Dusty. The old hound already curled beside the hearth gave a low grunt of agreement. Clara lay down on the rug beside him, boots under her head like a pillow. Jonas didn't argue. In the morning, he woke to the sound of chickens squawking. Clara was outside barefoot in the dust, tossing handfuls of feed like she'd always done it. He watched from the porch, arms crossed. "You'd done that before." She shook her head. I watched. The days began to slip by, not fast, but steady, like water smoothing stone. Clara didn't ask questions. Jonas didn't offer stories. But they shared the hours. She helped him chop wood, stacking the pieces carefully. She swept the porch without being told. When a hinge on the coop squealed too loud, she found oil in the barn and fixed it herself. One afternoon, she was sitting cross-legged in the yard, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. He sat beside her, mending a fence rail. They didn't speak, but her quiet wasn't empty. It was full of thought. That evening, while he stirred stew over the fire, she touched the windowsill and said, "You ever plant anything?" He paused. Used to. Can I? He opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. At the back was a small pouch cloth, faded blue, tied with twine. Inside, seeds wildflowers, beans maybe squash. It was his wife's long forgotten. They cleared a patch behind the house, pulled weeds, broke the hard ground. Together, they planted. Clara pressed the seeds in one by one, careful as if they might bruise. That night, she handed him a drawing. It was rough lines smudged, but it showed two figures, one tall, one small, kneeling over the earth. No faces, just outlines, but they were close. He didn't ask her to explain, he just pinned it above the mantel. Later, she sat beside Dusty, brushing his ear with slow strokes. Jonas watched from the chair, a book in his lap he wasn't reading. "You always live alone?" she asked. He looked at the fire. "Not always." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. One morning he found her in the barn, trying to patch a torn feed sack with twine and 2 big stitches. She looked up sheepish. "I like fixing things," she said. He handed her the proper thread. "Me too." At supper that night she asked if she could say grace. He blinked but nodded. Her words were simple. "Thanks for this food and the quiet and the chickens not dying today." He almost smiled. There were no big moments, no thunderclaps. Just the slow unfolding of trust. A chair pulled back without being asked. A cup rinsed and placed to dry. A porch swept. Sometimes in the evenings she would sit with her knees to her chest, watching the horizon. Not waiting, just watching. One night, as the stars came out, she whispered, "This place feels like it's holding its breath." Jonas, watching her from the doorway, said quietly, "Maybe it's learning how to breathe again." And though neither of them said it, something had shifted. A seed had taken root, not just in the garden, but in them. It didn't start with a knock at the door. It started with glances, those quick, fleeting ones people give when they think kindness is suspicious. The sort of look you feel on your skin before it reaches your eyes. The sort of look Jonas Calder hadn't seen in years. And Clara. She'd been on the receiving end of those stares all her short life. One Sunday, as they came into town in his wagon for flour and sugar, Clara sitting beside him with her hair in 2 uneven braids, something changed. It wasn't loud. It was in the silence, the way conversation paused as they passed, the way shoulders turned and whispers rippled like weeds in water. Jonas saw it. Clara felt it. Neither of them said anything, but the air had shifted. By the time they returned to the ranch, a note had been nailed to the fence post. Town council summons. A hearing to discuss the well-being of a minor child. It didn't say her name, didn't say his, but it didn't have to. Jonas took the note down, folded it twice, then tucked it into the drawer with the wildflower seeds. Clara found it later. She didn't ask what it was. She just looked up from the folded paper and said, "Am I going away?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he sat across from her, rubbing the edge of the table with his thumb. "You didn't do anything wrong. They always say," that first she whispered. "There are storms you can prepare for. You shut the windows, light a lantern, hold on to something solid. But some storms wear faces. Some knock at your door wearing Sunday hats and thin smiles. The Merritts were that kind of storm." Elsie Merritt had a way of speaking that made even compliments sound like corrections. Her husband Grady stood beside her like a fence post, sturdy, silent, and always a little too close. They'd heard about Clara, claimed they could offer her stability routine, Christian discipline. "We've already set up a room for her," Elsie said brightly one afternoon outside the general store. "Yellow curtains, embroidered pillowcases. A girl her age needs structure." Jonas had nodded slowly. "She has a room, and a pillow, and air that doesn't judge her." Elsie's smile froze. "You don't really think this is permanent, do you?" But it was already more permanent than anything Clara had ever known. That night, she didn't sleep on the floor. She climbed into her little bed and lay staring at the ceiling. The doll, with the missing eyes, beside her. Dusty curled on the rug. Jonas sat in the other room sharpening his knife, not because it needed sharpening, but because his hands needed something to do. The next day, Clara planted a second row of wildflowers. Said nothing. Jonas helped without speaking. When the wind kicked up, she stood still and let it lift the hair off her shoulders. "Storm's coming," Jonas said. She nodded. "They always do." The town didn't shout. It didn't throw stones. It whispered, whispers sharper than glass. Jonas heard them. About how a man who couldn't save his own wife might not be fit to keep a child. About how silence hides things. About how people remember. But he also noticed the ones who didn't speak. Miss Rain, the schoolteacher who once lost a daughter. Old Mr. Vaughn, who watched Clara one day help lift a bag of feed without being asked. Even the sheriff, who tipped his hat a little slower than before. Clara started drawing again. Bigger this time. She sketched the porch, the barn, even Jonas. One night, she asked if she could hang her picture on the wall. He handed her a nail and a hammer. "You trust me to do it right?" He didn't even look up. "I've seen how you plant seeds." The picture wasn't perfect. Her lines wavered. The perspective was off. But the faces his and hers were drawn close together, both looking toward the same sky. One afternoon, Jonas found a pair of old boots on the porch. Child-sized, worn but clean, no note. Just a quiet act from someone who'd seen too much and decided not to look away this time. He showed them to Clara. She didn't speak, just slipped them on. They fit better than the ones she'd carried all the way from the station. Then the sheriff arrived. "Jonas," he said gently, "you know what this hearing is. They've got families lined up, names on papers. Preacher's wife says the Merritts are already preparing." Jonas nodded. "She's not yours, you know." Jonas looked back toward the house where Clara sat, drawing in the window. "She didn't ask to be," he said. "She just asked to stay, and sometimes that's all a child really wants. To stay, to be seen and not sorted. Held, not handled." The sheriff sighed. "You're making this hard on yourself," maybe Jonas said. "But some things ought to be hard." Inside, Clara watched the two men speak. She didn't press her ear to the glass, didn't try to listen. She just held her red stone in her palm and whispered to it like a prayer. "Don't let the wind carry me this time. There are storms that pass, and there are storms that change the shape of the land. This one was going to do both." The old chapel had never felt colder. Its wooden walls, bleached and bowed from years of summer sun, now stood stiff with tension. Dust danced in the shafts of light spilling through the narrow windows, like memories refusing to settle. The benches were filled with faces Clara didn't recognize, though some had watched her from behind curtains, and others had whispered her name without knowing it. No one looked directly at her. Not until they had to. Jonas Calder sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees, palms open, as if braced for whatever might come. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken much since the notice came. But Clara could feel the storm behind his silence, the one he didn't let out loud. It was in the way he held his shoulders, how his boot tapped lightly against the wooden floor. In the house he had been a mountain. Here he looked like a man balancing on a ledge. They called it a hearing, but it didn't feel like a place for fairness. It felt like a place where people gathered to see if love had the right shape. A place where a child's heart had to be weighed against paperwork, pedigree, and perception. The Merritts sat 2 rows up dressed in matching tones, powder blues, and pressed collars. Elsie's gloved hands clutched a delicate purse like it held all the answers. Grady's back was straight, his eyes locked forward. They looked like people who knew how to win things. They didn't glance back once, even when Clara coughed lightly into her sleeve. The preacher began with a prayer. Clara didn't bow her head. She stared at the floor at her boots, still new to her, still slightly too big. Her fingers played with the hem of her dress, a small tremble there, even as her face stayed still. She didn't want to cry, not now, not when everything felt like it was being decided by strangers. Grady Merritt spoke first. He talked about propriety, about order, about how a child needed consistency and discipline. He mentioned their clean home, their church records, their standing in the community. Words like stable, structured, appropriate floated around the room like polished stones meant to weigh down any opposition. Then Elsie added her part. We've already prepared a space for her. She said, her voice honeyed but firm. Yellow curtains, a writing desk. She'll be surrounded by children her own age. It's the environment she deserves. She needs to be molded, rehabilitated, redirected. Clara heard all of it, but it felt like they were talking about furniture, not people, about fixing something that wasn't broken. When they asked if anyone else wanted to speak, the room hesitated. The silence stretched. Then a voice rose, Miss Rain, the schoolteacher. She's reading, she said, drawing too. She listens better than most and she tries harder than many. That's not nothing. Old Mr. Vaughn cleared his throat. She helped me carry grain. Didn't ask, just saw me straining. That girl notices things. Even the general store clerk stood and muttered, she always pays attention, doesn't talk much. But when she does, it matters. Then came Jonas. He didn't stand right away. He looked at Clara first. Not with fear, not with ownership, with recognition. He saw her. All of her. The hard parts, the quiet parts, the parts even she didn't know were there. He stood tall and quiet. She showed up with nothing but a doll and a pair of boots tied like a question. His voice was gravel slow. Didn't ask for help, just asked to stay a day. And I said yes. Just for a day. He looked at the council. She swept my porch without being told. She fed the hens before she fed herself. She didn't cry, not once, even when the wind kept knocking the door open. She just stayed. He paused. The room held its breath. She didn't fix my house. She fixed the quiet in it. The preacher turned to Clara. Do you want to say something? Child? She stood. Her knees wobbled, but her chin lifted. In her hand, the red stone glinted in the dusty light. Her voice, when it came, was small, but it didn't shake. I know I'm not easy to place, she began. I'm not good at saying things right. I forget stuff. I sleep with my boots by the door 'cause I used to have to run sometimes. She looked at the Merritts. Your house sounds real nice, but I ain't a hole in a wall. I'm not empty. I don't need to be filled. I just want to belong. Then she turned to Jonas. He lets me try, lets me be wrong. He waited when I couldn't talk, and he didn't ask for anything back. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Her name was written on it in shaky block letters. Clara Wynn, she read. But I want one more name, if it's all right. She looked at the council. Clara Wynn Calder. Silence fell again. Not heavy this time, just waiting. The preacher leaned in, whispered with the others. A few papers rustled. A pen scratched. Then he looked up. You may stay with Mr. Calder. Your name will be recorded as Clara Wynn Calder. Elsie let out a small gasp. Grady's jaw clenched. But no one stood to argue. No one dared. Clara didn't smile right away. She looked at Jonas unsure. He bent slightly enough for her to press her forehead to his arm. That was enough. On the way home, the sun was just beginning to lower. The light hit the wildflower patch behind the house, now blooming despite the wind, despite everything. At supper, Clara placed her drawing on the wall beside the hearth. Then she took a stub of pencil and added 3 words beneath the sketch. We stayed anyway. And for the first time, she didn't sleep with her boots beside the door. She left them by the window in the moonlight, where they could rest too. The wind came quietly that morning, brushing over the land like it was hesitant to wake anything. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still, not heavy, not uncertain, just still. Jonas Calder stood on the porch, a coffee cup warming his hands, his eyes resting on the girl sitting in the garden rows below. Clara was kneeling in the dirt, barefoot, her dress smudged with earth, and her hair tied back with a faded ribbon someone had left in a paper bag on their porch days ago. She was humming, soft and tuneless, like the sound of something growing. Around her, wildflowers bent toward the sun, blooming fierce and soft against a backdrop of dust. She'd planted every one with her own hands. Jonas took a sip of his coffee, still unsure when the house had stopped feeling empty. Maybe it was the drawing on the wall beside the hearth. Maybe it was the boots by the door that weren't his. Maybe it was the way he'd started cooking more than he could eat. Or maybe it was just her laugh, still rare, still quiet but real. That morning, Clara asked if they could build something. A shelf, she said, for my drawings, and for the books we're going to get. He nodded. You draw, I'll hammer. She grinned, then added, and maybe a little drawer for my marbles. Marbles, I've got 2 now, she said, proudly, holding out her palm. The red one with the swirl she'd always carried, and a new green one Miss Rain had slipped her after school. I think I'm collecting 'em. Later that afternoon, they gathered wood from the barn and spread it across the grass. Clara helped sort the nails her fingers, careful, deliberate. She was good with quiet things, things that needed patience. Jonas saw how she lined up the pieces before asking where to begin. You got a plan? He asked. She shrugged. Not really. Just wanted to hold stuff that matters. That became the measure. Not width or height, just whether it could hold what mattered. The shelf took 2 days. By the time they mounted it, Clara had 3 new sketches ready to place, one of Dusty curled by the fire, one of Jonas standing with a saw, and one of the wildflower patch messy and glorious. That evening, as supper finished, Clara asked, You ever think we'd end up like this? Jonas set down his fork. Like what? Not alone. He looked at her. Then out the window where the sky was just beginning to shift into dusk. No, he said, honestly. But I'm glad we did. Letters started coming. Small ones, folded into cookies, tucked under firewood bundles, one from the sheriff's wife, another from the preacher's daughter. Even Mrs. Patch had dropped off a sewing kit with a note that simply said, in case she ever wants to learn. Clara kept each one, folded them neat and stacked them beside her bed like they were proof of something important. She also started writing her own letters, short ones she never sent. Notes to her mama, to the train conductor, to the wind. Sometimes she read them aloud to Dusty. The dog listened like it mattered. One day, Jonas came home to find Clara sitting on the steps with a hammer in her lap. What are you up to? He asked. Fixing that loose board, she said, pointing to a plank that creaked every time someone passed. Thought it ought to sound strong when folks walk up. He crouched beside her, handed her a nail. You know, she said, I think I'm gonna stay here forever. He smiled, not wide, but deep. I'd be all right with that. That night, Clara placed her boots beside his at the door. Not because she might run, but because she didn't plan to. In the months that followed, the house changed. A coat rack appeared. A second chair got fixed. Jonas brought home a rocking chair from town-busted leg and all, and Clara insisted on learning how to mend it. They painted the porch steps yellow, then laughed when Dusty tracked paw prints all the way across. Clara hung a new drawing each week. Some were scenes, some were just words. One said, "This is mine too." Another were a kind of story. One evening she sat on the porch swing and asked if I had a middle name. What would it be? Jonas rubbed his jaw. Hope, he said, after a long pause. Why? Because you didn't ask for it, he said. But you brought it anyway. She wrote it that night in her notebook. Clara, Hope, Wynn, Calder. The next morning, as the sky stretched gold across the plains, she braided her hair with blue ribbon and whispered to herself in the mirror, "You're not just passing through anymore." Then she ran outside to greet the day. Jonas stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, watching her chase Dusty around the garden. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't wonder what he'd lost. He only saw what he'd found. Epilogue. What the wind carried. From the beginning, Clara's story wasn't meant to be told with grandeur. It began with silence, with wind and dust and the kind of heartbreak too big for a child to carry alone. And yet, it was within that silence, a forgotten station, a stranger's wagon, that something remarkable grew. Clara, who had lost everything, who held only a broken doll and a red marble, never asked for much. She asked to stay one day, just one, but in that day she planted something in a man whose life had long stopped blooming. Jonas Calder had lived years in the shadow of silence, a man bruised by loss and hardened by solitude. He didn't set out to become a father, didn't even believe he still had the capacity to offer warmth. But he had a spare sandwich, a quiet porch, and eventually the patience to let a child's presence reshape his broken world. Through Clara, Jonas rediscovered the meaning of being needed, not out of duty or guilt, but from the quiet joy of shared mornings and small brave questions. He watched as her curiosity crept through the cracks of their lives, her questions about names and clouds her gentle way with animals, her courage to speak truth even in the face of judgment. He saw her dignity unshakable even when others tried to define her worth by paperwork and propriety. In return, Clara found something too, a place where her silence didn't make people uncomfortable, where her fears weren't dismissed, and where someone cared enough to hammer a nail into the wall just for her drawing. She learned that home wasn't a structure with proper curtains or a place where you were dressed and displayed like a prize. It was where your boots could sit next to someone else's without fear. Together, they didn't just survive the storms, they rebuilt from them. Not all at once, but piece by piece, a garden bed, a shelf, a chair mended with care. They wrote their own rhythm, one born of resilience and mutual respect. Even the town, with all its suspicion and slow-spoken judgments, began to change. Not because it was told to, but because it saw something undeniable. Love. Quiet, fierce, imperfect love. By the end, Clara wasn't the same girl left behind on the bench at Monument Valley Station, and Jonas wasn't the same man who once lived in a house with nothing but echoes. They had become something new, something chosen. The story of Clara Wynn Calder is not a tale of grand gestures or miracles. It is the story of two forgotten people choosing day after day to show up for each other, to believe in something as simple and as complicated as family, to plant hope where none had grown, to say in every small act, "I see you, you belong." And if we're lucky, we remember that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a hammer and a shelf. Sometimes it's letting a child draw their name and mean it. Sometimes it's just staying. The lesson and the legacy. What can we take from this story, you might ask? We live in a time when people feel more isolated than ever. Families break apart. Communities turn cold. And often we are taught to look away from pain that doesn't belong to us. But this story reminds us that we are not powerless. That kindness, true, honest kindness, is not something reserved for saints or superheroes. It lives in simple choices. Sharing your porch. Trusting someone who's been hurt. Letting go of assumptions. Believing that people can change and deserve to. Clara's journey teaches us that we don't have to come from perfect beginnings to create beautiful endings. And Jonas shows us that healing is possible even for the most silent hearts. When we choose to love someone, not because it's easy or expected, but because we see their worth, especially when the world doesn't, that's when we start building homes. Not just houses, not just shelters, but true, lasting homes. In your own life, maybe there's someone who just needs a shelf, a place to set their story down. Maybe it's a child, a neighbor, a friend. Or maybe it's yourself. Don't wait for perfect timing. Don't wait to feel ready. You don't need permission to be a place of comfort. You just need to be present. And if this story spoke to you, if this story stirred something inside you, if it made you pause, made you reflect, made you feel less alone, then I ask you, this stay with us. We have more stories to share, more truths wrapped in dust and wind, and the quiet corners of the American West. Subscribe to this channel, not just to follow a page, but to become part of a community that believes stories like Clara and Jonas's matter, because they do, more than ever. We tell these tales so that people remember love doesn't need permission. It just needs a place to land. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.